Hello, everybody, and welcome to our next TripSchool webinar in our sort of ever expanding every 2 week series of conversations that we have about tour guiding. We tackled the state of taxes and the IRS for tour guides last week. We're really shifting gears this week to a sort of world that I think we're all aware of, which is a world that feels divided and contentious, especially in our work as public educators, historians, conversers, and connectors of varieties of people all around the world. We're in a space in the United States and elsewhere where some of the received ways of thinking about how we do our job as guides and what we're permitted to do and what we see our mission and our purpose to be is definitely in conversation. And it's not just our job, but it's the job of educators, it's the job of historians, of a lot of different kinds of people out there in the world who are having dialogues like this. And so I wanted to have this kind of public conversation with a good friend of mine and a teacher for whom I have guided for several years now, Mike Fishback. Mike is out in California, and he's graciously uh, volunteered against his will to be my interlocutor for this conversation. And so, Mike, thank you for being here. And I was wondering if you could begin by introducing yourself and just sharing a little bit of your background.
Sure. Thank you, Mitch. Well, first, I want to thank you. It's an honor to have been asked to be on. Um, as Mitch said, I've been on a number of tours with him, and he is truly the best. And although I'm sure all of you are also wonderful, um, I'm a social studies teacher. I teach eighth grade and seventh grade, sixth grade, middle school, um, at Almond and Country Day School in San Jose, California. This is my fifth school. I've taught at charter schools, independent schools, always middle school. I tend to teach at ideologically diverse schools, not necessarily balanced. I mean, I've taught on the coasts, so the majority of our constituencies tend to be progressive, democratic leaning. But we have sizable minorities of more conservative, libertarian families. Some of them are open about that. Some of them are not, and especially in a community that kind of everyone kind of assumes people are progressive, there tends to be some level of being in the closet about conservative viewpoints. So being aware of that, it actually I seek out ideologically diverse communities because it, for me as a social studies teacher, it helps to know that people are going to have different points of view, and that's where the discussion gets interesting and helpful, and people can learn, um, so that we don't keep people in their bubbles. And so I've been working a lot the past few years on how to have people with different viewpoints have conversations where they can learn from each other. So I'm involved in iCivics, uh, and gone to presented at a number of conferences recently about this and adjacent topics. And I've had conversations with Mitch about this during our tours, and I'm excited to see if I can be of help to the conversation.
Uh, that's great. Yeah, I think really this was birthed out of the fact that you and I live in a certain tension when we do lead our tours, because our tours are public conversations with the students around a lot of juicy, meaty issues that sometimes only get raised in the context of visiting places like Washington or New York City. When you arrive there, the topics sort of give birth to themselves and they become conversation pieces, whether you like it or not. And I'll say this, there's this kind of received wisdom that's long lived in our guiding community, which is just don't talk about politics. Like, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion, don't bring your opinions into it, and then just have a good time. And I want to challenge that a little bit, but I want to start with the kind of topic that we chose for this, which is the role of tour guides in civil discourse. Because very specifically, I like the phrase civil discourse because I think sometimes we think of it as, oh, just be nice. Just make sure everybody gets along. But I was wondering what civil discourse means to you, if you could unpack that term a little bit for me.
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, what it doesn't mean is everyone should try to agree with each other and be nice and just let the things they feel strongly about kind of slide away. And it's too often misinterpreted like that, um, especially in its other form, civility. Oh, could we just be civil to each other? Just stop, right? The tension that I experience as a teacher is as a teacher of young teenagers is how to help them at this, like, at once they have bold opinions and they feel strongly about things, and I don't at all want to dilute that. It's important to believe in things and have values. And that can exist in tension with, we want to be open to other people's ways of believing and and things that people see as true and positions people take and the priorities people have. Not so you can change your mind. I'm never out to change anyone's mind. I'm out to expand people's thinking so that they can see other ways of thinking about something, and they can kind of infuse that into their own way of thinking and their own position. And civil discourse means that while you're doing that, you're doing it in a way where you're respecting that other people are human beings, and that instead of being your enemy and the person you have to defeat. So it's kind of the difference between having a debate, although debates should be civil as well, and having a debate versus having a discussion where you're exchanging ideas. And in some cases, in some activities we do, instead of a discussion, it's a deliberation where you're actually trying to solve problems using lots of different perspectives all together and seeing how different perspectives, ways of thinking, different identities can actually make a solution, a proposal stronger than it would be if only one identity was thinking about it. So it's we don't want to dilute anyone's beliefs. We don't want to convince anyone out of their thinking. We want to put people in conversation with one another so that they can learn from each other.
Let's talk about that idea of having these conversations. And there's two things that come to my mind. One is, how do you have these conversations without it getting immediately touchy or debatey or difficult? And the second is, are there a certain set of circumscribed topics that we should be conversing on, and ones that we should make sure we don't touch because they're too difficult or controversial or whatever it may be?
Yeah. Well, to your first question, um, I mean, I've I've recently been thinking a lot about how I word questions and how I respond to things. For a long time in my career, if I were to put up or like to introduce different sides to something, or if students in the classroom were to voice different sides, the next logical question was, well, which one do you agree with? And then they kind of debate it out. Like, what do you think? Who do you think is right? What would and and it kind of makes sense to do that. You help people. A lot of the skill that we teach, classic skill we teach in middle school and high school is like having a claim and supporting it with evidence and like making that argument. I've been transitioning more to asking, so laying out different sides, to asking, um, name a compelling point from each of the sides. And what that does is, instead of having it be like a battle, it starts with the presumption that all of these different points of view, there's something you can agree with one of them and not disagree with the other, but there's something in each one that's valuable, or like maybe there is, right? Can you find the thing that's valuable? And so, and it also kind of puts everything on a playing field where like we're going to be exploring an idea. And getting to Mitch, to your second question about like topics, I think really like, I mean, I'm sure there are topics that are you just can't do that for, but for most historical topics, for most contemporary topics, everyone who believes something believes that they're the good guy, right? Like everyone's the protagonist of their own story. Everyone feels like they're right. Very few people the go around thinking that like I'm the villain and I'm out to ruin people's life. Like, people usually don't think. Some people probably do, but for the most part, you want to assume that people have good reasons for things. And to start from there, even the most despicable historical figures, historical movements, there's some socio-political or socioeconomic reason that people were upset about something. It may have been like a misguided scapegoat or whatever, but there's something in there that can teach us a lesson about humanity. And so when you start there, when you start in saying, okay, it's interesting to explore different sides to things. It's interesting to think about who the different players were in this historical episode and why they did what they did and why they thought they were right, and have it become kind of a mystery to solve as to like if you have trouble understanding someone, then you have to be more curious and think about like what is that thing you can understand. Then it's easier to get to civil discourse, and it also helps establish from the teacher or from the leader, from the facilitator, a sense of like we're going to be in curious mode rather than simply trying to win mode.
I love that idea of getting to the root of sort of the human emotion that's behind the opinion or the belief. That the belief might be absolutely despicable, but what gives birth to that belief is a shared human emotion that probably we've all felt at a certain point,
Yes.
which is we feel diminished as an individual, as a country. We feel a sense of shame, and it's also maybe the most human thing of all to begin by blaming anything but yourself or anyone but yourself. And then, um, yeah, I love that. Are there topics that are off limits in your classroom on a tour?
Um, I don't think there are topics that are off limits. I would a few years ago I would have said religion is a really touchy subject to get into. Um, and I don't know, I've been evolving on that too. I've taught last year I taught a sixth grade curriculum where we were learning about religions around the world, ancient religions, but also like into contemporary religions, and just looking at like what is a religion, what is a belief system, why do people feel compelled to think about the world in certain ways. I feel like there are ways to do that one too. Again, like thinking about how everyone is searching for meaning in life, and and then of course there's the classic like you can't find any good in Hitler and the Nazis and the I mean that's the classic, right? And I actually had just finished teaching about that topic, and I think part of it is what I just said about like not to explain Hitler, but to explain why many Germans allowed it to happen or went along with it. And of course, this year seventh graders are making a lot of connections to the contemporary moment, about why it's hard uh, to do what you might believe is the right thing to do, but if you do the right thing, maybe you're putting yourself at risk, maybe you're putting your family at risk, um, or thinking about why it's so easy, Mitch, as you were saying, to otherize people and to view them as the enemy. Um, so even that, I feel like there are ways to look at an entire population of people and think about what their motivations might have been, rather than like the one evil person at the top. The other thing, actually, just as maybe as a side note, but actually it's probably pretty relevant, that we were talking about with the Holocaust, is I teach it right after I teach about Congo, the rubber plantations in Congo, and King Leopold of Belgium, who basically takes Congo as his personal colony and enslaves the entire population, and half of the population, 10 million people, die. And one of the questions we ask after studying the Holocaust is, why do we know so much about the Holocaust? We have so much remembrance of the Holocaust. And it's so hard to find resources on Congo. And talking about like that opens a whole other world of conversation about identity and different racial classifications in different parts of the world and how they're different. So there's a lot to explore. And so my point here is if you're if you are asking questions that are from curiosity, where there's lots of different ways to explain something, there's no one right answer. Um, that instead you're thinking to like expand people's thinking rather than trying to change what their viewpoint is or correct someone out of what they think. I think that's where teachers often find themselves in a tricky spot where they know something is right and true, and someone else is having trouble understanding it, so they try really really hard to like get that person to think the way they're thinking. It rarely works, and it also it doesn't help learn the full group's learning either.
Began by talking about how there is a dominant sort of ideological framework that a lot of your sort of classrooms are going to sort of have kind of in their family, in their family roots, or just because of where you are. And then there's a majority, even if it's sizable. I'm wondering how you think about creating a sort of inclusive environment that makes sure that you're not playing to the home team, that you're including others into it, that you're creating an environment where everybody's viewpoints feel valued, and that you're creating something together as a true cohesive community of knowledge seekers.
So I have two ways of thinking about that off the top of my head. One is the classic teacher. It's become like best practice among teachers to set norms or expectations in the classroom alongside students before we begin. So that would be like, sitting the group down or walking with the group or whatever, and thinking they know what we know that stuff's going to come up that's going to be hard. When that happens, what do we want to do? What do we want to, what kind of expectations do we want to set for ourselves so that we remember them and we can all like treat each other as humans? So those end up being things like, share the air, step up and step back, make sure that you speak when you have something to say, and make sure you give other people a chance to talk. Um, know that everyone is speaking the thing that's true for them, right? And even if you know it's inaccurate, it's still true for them, right? When you believe something is true and you express it, how do you feel when someone just says, no, that's wrong? Like, you don't want to feel that way, and so you want to give the same grace to someone else. You want to be curious. um and things like that, so that you're doing it in advance, you're doing it proactively. The danger of doing it in response to something that's already happened is that then everyone knows the reason you're doing it is because of that person over there. And they become kind of the enemy of the group, and you're trying to get them in line. If you do it in advance, before the community is like, or as you're forming the community, then you could just remind people as things start to get heated or just controversial, like, okay, remember these, and in the classroom we'll have them written down on the wall. It's like, remember, we reference these, we made these together, and we want to make sure as we have this really great discussion that we are remembering these expectations. um
Yeah,
Sorry,
no,
yeah,
go ahead.
I'm trying to remember the second thing I had in mind, but I will remember it. Ask you to say the next thing.
As soon as I talk, you'll remember it. Um, yeah, you have 9 months or 8 months to sort of form these bonds. We have 5 days, and so what happens very quickly as we open our mouths at the beginning of a tour sort of sets the expectation from the audience, from the guests' point of view. Like, oh, I know who you are. I understand who you are now. They've already sort of framed you, and so I'm wondering, so we have to be very quick
Yeah.
to establish these kinds of norms and establish what the kids might call a vibe for the tour today. I'm wondering if you have advice or insights for what that might, what that might look like as a best practice for our
I
guides.
mean, the first word I go to again is curiosity, like establishing, and it can be a fun curiosity, right? Like, being curious about them, although not in a dismissive way, but in like an uplifting way. Um, whatever history you might be exploring in the time you have with them, just to like, having like kind of fun things about it, and asking, curious questions and seeing what they come up with, like, to just to establish a rapport that's about asking questions, trying to figure out together what we might believe about it or what we might think. um Kind of, that's kind of how I begin our whatever 9 months of school year, with content right away. And that's actually not best practice. Most teachers will begin just with like norm setting and icebreakers and getting to know you games. I find that starting with the subject, and like, okay, here's what we were going to explore, here's something really engaging, like high interest about the subject, we're going to start there, and it brings people into a community around a subject. um and I think that's actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it's kind of a partial antidote to the contentious conversations later, because if you've started it that's just about you on a person level, you've then established that this group is about us as people. And then if something happens that's tense, you can then kind of, oh, that's about me. If it's about the subject, about the history, about the place, whatever your topic is, and you start there, then you're establishing a community that's exploring in a common exploration together. And we're always coming back to like, I wonder what we think about this, rather than, um, I wonder what we think about you, or like, it's your opinion versus this other person's opinion. The other thing I wanted to say, and this is kind of in keeping with all of this, is, um, in those moments when there's like perhaps a tense exchange, um or when someone might feel like either like everyone's looking at them because they said the wrong thing, right? There's something that's a brain science that I learned right at the beginning of my career, um, about toxic moments and how in the brain, when someone feels like they are being, when they're being attacked, all they're thinking about from that moment on is that everyone is judging them, watching them. How are you gonna? What are you gonna do moment by moment so that people don't attack you more? That leader or that teacher, how are they thinking about you? What's the consequences going to be? And all of your learning from that moment on gets cut off. You're not going to do any more learning that period, that day, maybe that week. So the thing you want to avoid is creating a toxic moment for someone if it hasn't already been created. So if someone doesn't realize that they have kind of been the instigator of a difficult moment, um, I think what often happens with teachers is that they want to make sure they're standing up for the people who got insulted or offended. So they'll call that student out and be like, you can't do that. Like, let's have a conversation. And the student becomes the enemy, and all the learning shut down. And then for a lot of the other kids in the room, their learning shut down because they're thinking about that moment. And so what I've learned to do is kind of finding a way or manufacturing a way to bring that person aside as soon as possible and to confer with them and to bring them in and say like, um I've realized that things are getting a little bit tense, a little bit heated. I don't know if you've realized that too, but I'm sensing that. And I know that you feel strongly about what we're talking about. Can you help me figure out a way to make everyone feel included and respected right now? Like, how can we do it? And so bringing in the people who either are most likely to cause those moments or have already caused those moments, and like having them feel like they're part of the moving forward helps them continue the learning, helps the group continue the learning. And you can also then, of course, do that with the people who, if someone had expressed to you that they felt offended or insulted, and having that same conversation with them, like, how can we help? Oh, did what that person said? How can we help them learn? How can we help them understand? So again, like the whole bigger picture is we're treating everyone as human beings, and everyone who feels like they're a good person. And so what often happens when you kind of sacrifice one for the sake of the group, like we're going to label this person the bad person in order for everyone else to feel safe, we're really not doing that. We're making everyone feel tense and we're ramping it up. So finding ways to have those conversations where you're bringing everyone into the process, and then with the established norms and all of those work to help not only repair more easily, more meaningfully, but also keeping the learning going so that people don't shut down.
I remember very early on, as I was guiding through New York City, it was the year of the Occupy Wall Street protests, and it was just after, and I was given a tour, and I pointed out at Zuccotti Park that this was the location where it had happened. And I remember, by the way, it's actually rarely the students, it's usually the parents that are along with the students, or an adult that feels like they need to inject or they feel threatened. And it was a dad that spoke up and screamed at me and said, "Oh, you're one of those communists that think this," and he went off on me in front of all the students and everything. In those moments of very pointed challenge where already they're kind of in attack mode, right? This isn't a moment where I'm going to put my hand around his back and say, "Hey, let's figure out this together," right? Like, what are strategy? What are strategies for those more confrontational moments?
Tell us more about that. I find that like
Hmm.
that those three words, tell us more, they're really golden, because often when someone speaks, yeah, like someone will say something because they usually it's been bubbling up for a while. Like they're thinking something and this is their opportunity to finally say it, and usually the first thing that comes out of their mouth is the tensest thing they're gonna say. Oh, like, again, curiosity mode. Tell us more. It's interesting you said that. Tell us more about that. Or what makes you say that? Like, I mean, maybe it's not an attack on you, but if it's like a more general thing, what makes you say that? Which is different, by the way, than why do you think that? Right? Again, about like particulars of language. When you say why do you think that, you're putting the you're like kind of accusing them of not having a good reason. You're like, it's like a gotcha question. Like, and then they have to explore like, well, what happened in my childhood that made me think that, right? As opposed to what makes you say that? First, it's not about the thinking, it's about the say. Like, you said something, what? Tell us about that, as opposed to what you're thinking. But also, like, what makes you say that? Like, there's again, like, tell us more. Give us the backstory of that. That does a few things. First, it buys you time to like think about what really you are you do you have to like do something more drastic, or is it actually just like a quip that they mean in good humor and you misinterpreted, or they just said it wrong. It also usually the response to tell us more is more circumspect, more thoughtful. um and they can like give some of their context. Sometimes it's a story, like sometimes there's a story in their background that kind of like, oh, that helps me make sense of what just happened, right? So and then if I mean, maybe I'm not responding directly to the specific example you gave, but like in those kinds of situations, when there's tension, that kind of, again, leading with curiosity, wondering about what just happened. uh and then the other part of that component, about specifically about like something like Occupy Wall Street, would be, well, I'm actually really interested in what happened here, because there were a lot of different perspectives on this. On one hand, there was this group. On the other hand, there was this group. And so even if it wasn't something that you meant to like go into detail about, it's an opportunity to say like, I'm interested in the history. Um, and I mentioned the protesters, and there are lots of other people that we could mention who were involved in this. And to reiterate that it's about like this clash of ideas, and every stakeholder has something in there that's valid, and to treat it like that. Um so those are the first things that come to mind. I have not really been in a situation like that where I've been like, all of a sudden I'm accused of being on a particular side that someone disagrees with. But those are the things that come to mind as like techniques that are kind of in my toolbox to bring out and to kind of let someone have their bold idea, right? You don't want to undermine what someone believes, but give them space and give them an opportunity, give them invitation to do it in a way that then can de-escalate the tension, so you can actually have the civil discourse.
Oh my God, no, you just gave me the perfect phrase. Next time I'm going to say, thank you for that bold idea. I appreciate
Well,
it.
try it.
We'll try it.
I don't want to sound too
Um,
condescending, but yeah.
there's two threads I want to that pick up on with this sort of idea. One is, what do you do as a guide or an educator in this case, um, to prepare yourself to make sure that you're presenting a site of significance that you personally might disagree with, but understand that it's historically or in a contemporary way important to address and present.
A site that you disagree with, or like
So let's say that let's yeah let me say that I personally completely disagree with the people who are at Occupy Wall Street and what they stood for, but I understand that there's a certain importance to it there. And let's make this actually more concrete, more relevant. The painting over of Black Lives Matter Plaza in front of the White House was a site of contention in St. John's Church and all of that for, for 4 or 5 years now. Um, we have people in this conversation right now that probably almost 50-50 straddle the political divide, and yet it's our responsibility not to simply say, "Oh, I don't like that thing because I don't agree with it." It's a part of the fabric of a place. What do we do to make sure that we're presenting it or connecting with it, I guess, authentically?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing, I mean, I definitely would still do it, right? If it's significant, it's interesting. I mean, things like that are fascinating to be at a place, especially if it's contemporary. Like, oh, like I remember the last time we were at the White House, and a lot of the kids wanted to see St. John's Church because they remembered about Trump and the upside down Bible. That's the image they remembered.
Mm.
And the conversations I was having with them were like, yeah, but here's what happened, right? Here's where the protesters were. Here's people get, and there was a dispute among the government officials about what exactly they did, and then and so we went through like what I had remembered about what the discourse was. But I'd also say, if you know you're going to be in that situation, to think in advance about your language and word choice. And that's another thing like that often comes up in conversations about civil discourse, which is a lot of teachers will say, "Well, I just, I just make sure I'm not biased. I just take bias out of it." And a really important thing to remember and understand is that there is no such thing as not being biased. If you are using language, you are conveying bias. The word choice we use, the words, the way we string them together, the words we leave out, what we use as adjectives versus nouns, like all of those things um, communicate not necessarily how we feel about things, but what our sources are and what our what like especially with contemporary, like what our news sources are, where we're getting our information. So I think it's important to think through, what am I going to say about this? How am I going to start? What language am I going to start with? Maybe you introduce competing language. There were people who called this an insurrection, and there were people who called this a rally of love, or whatever the phrase was. And of course, like, there'll be people snickering, and it's like, I'm telling you what people say. Um, and because I think for me, like, you want to let people have their nods to each other, like, oh yeah. I think that's healthy, where they realize where they are and they've thought about it before. You don't want it to turn into something nasty between people. And as the facilitator, you want to not be neutral, not be unbiased, but be kind of like, here's what I know about the situation. Here's what the argument, the debate was, or the challenges to information were at the time. And here's what happened after, right? Kind of sticking to again, just the facts, is like in air quotes, because depending on what facts you select, it's going to be biased. But yeah, saying like, this is significant. I think the idea of, I think that was your word, right, Mitch? Like, the idea of significance, that's kind of I think that's a safe concept for now. This is significant. It's significant because it was interesting. It had ramifications. It's emblematic of a larger societal debate, or growing pains, and so it's important to know about it. Uh, Again, like, we don't know anyway. Things might be changing along those lines, but for now, I think that's a safe place to be.
This concept of bias is really interesting because in some ways it's the air we breathe, it's the water we swim in. And so we don't know what we don't know about the words that we use, that calling something a riot versus calling something a protest. It's what we've heard. It's what we've heard from our friends. It's what we've heard from the media that we consume. And so that is what it is. What are what are ways that we burst that bubble for ourselves and that we become aware of our own
Yeah.
non-neutrality?
Last summer I went to the Sphere Summit, which is a teacher summit sponsored by the Cato Institute in DC, which is a libertarian think tank. And they do it in conjunction with the Brookings Institution, which is a progressive liberal think tank. They have guests from the Heritage Foundation, the conservative think tank that wrote Project 2025, and a variety of other, policy writing groups in DC. And the idea is to have teachers both see civil discourse modeled between people who fundamentally disagree with each other about big things, but know each other and are in a community of policy people, but also like to think about how to bring these different ideologies to students. And one of the best resources that I found there was a little book, and there's actually a PDF online if you go to the Sphere website. It's called The Three Languages of Politics. It's by a libertarian thinker named Arnold Kling. And what he lays out is, he says, like, the reason why people talk past each other in modern day America is that everyone is speaking one of three languages of politics. And you typically are fluent in one, and maybe you're familiar with another one, but you typically don't speak all of them. There's a progressive language, which is the language of oppressor versus oppressed. That the way the world is structured is there are oppressors and there's oppressed, and you're on the side of the oppressed against the oppressor. There's a libertarian language of liberty versus coercion, that you should be on the side of liberty versus people trying to restrict your liberty. And there's a conservative language of civilization versus barbarism. That there's the Western civilization that is good, and there are people trying to destroy it. And you should be on the side of civilization. And that was really helpful to me to think about. Like, I'm seeing it all the time now. I'm picking it up, like, whatever media I consume, if it's progressive media, if there's libertarian, like, I can pick up, like, oh, that thing that person thinks is a universal value, they're actually speaking this political language. Um, and it actually helped. I'll give an example of where this helped in an eighth grade project this year. We do a project on political parties where we're trying to, like, pick an issue, and the kids they pick an issue and they figure out, like, where the political parties stand on an issue and why. And I use the three languages model as part of that. There were a few students this year who chose the Gaza war, and they they gather that, okay, Republicans kind of more uniformly support Israel, and Democrats seem more divided, Israel and Palestinians. And part of the project is they have to give an explanation for why. And one of the ways that they made sense of this is, well, if you are seeing the world, if you're speaking the progressive language of oppressed and oppressor, then in this situation, you have, like, who's the group that is more historically oppressed in that region, and who's the oppressor, who's the powerful group that's doing something to them. And in that way of thinking, you might interpret that to be Palestinians are the oppressed, Israel's the oppressor. And so in a progressive language leans democratic, you'd side with the Palestinians. In a conservative language of civilization versus barbarism, who are the barbarians here? Okay, we have Hamas attacking the Western civilization outpost in the Middle East of Israel. And so in that frame, you're on the side of Israel against the barbarians, against Hamas, and you do what you need to do to defeat the barbarians. So that would explain the conservative support for Israel, and why Democrats and why many Jewish Democrats in America are torn about this. And the way those kids made sense of it, like, okay, like, they can see, and that most of those were Jewish kids who have an opinion about this. And it was a way for them to use the language framework to say, like, okay, I get why someone would have an opinion that's different from the opinion I've been receiving from my family, or that I viscerally believe because of what I see and who I am. I may not agree with it, but I see where they're coming from. I see it, they're viewing the world that way. That's where they're coming from. Another way to frame it that I've been really cognizant of recently is, there are many Americans who feel like it's just a universal value of America, that the people who are most deserving of help and support from the government are the people who have the least, who need the most, who've been, unheard by society, abandoned by society, and we need to give them the resources that they have, at least something, or have a safety net, that the marginalized, the minoritized are the most deserving. And there's another thread running through all of American history that's, I would say, dominant now, which is the people who are most deserving are the people who've demonstrated success, that they can be successful. So the people who are the wealthiest, who are the job creators, who are in the 2012 election with Romney and Ryan, it was the makers and the takers. Like, the people who show that they contribute the most should get the most from their government. That explains, tax cuts for the wealthiest, because then that money then is used to expand, the rest of the. So, like, that, those two ways of thinking of who's deserving of support are both real, that, like, people really believe both of those. But if you've been either raised to, or you're in a media bubble that keeps repeating, like, one worldview, whether it's those three languages, whether it's this, dichotomy, that it's hard to realize there's another way of thinking, that people may be coming to it, like, genuinely from that way of thinking. And so even if you vehemently disagree, I mean, all of us, like, all the things I named, I'm sure people on this call vehemently disagree with, like, one or two or three of those things, like, oh, I can't believe this. But it's important to understand that people do. And so that's been really helpful for me to realize when I'm speaking from a bubble, or when someone's speaking from a bubble. And I need to understand like that's not a universal value. That's like a set of values. I've taught that to students. I've brought it into conversations with my faculty at our school about how to think about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, like moving it beyond just the progressive language and having DEI be a conversation among the three languages of politics so that everyone feels included and no one feels indoctrinated. So anyway, I know I'm rambling about that, but like those are ways to like catch yourself, uh, to realize that like if someone is making a comment that your visceral reaction might be, oh, they're evil. They're part of the group that hates me or that hates other people, right? If you think of it as like, what is the worldview that I already know about, that like that's and that's real, that it's valid. I disagree, but it's valid, that then you can speak to them through that language.
Lot to unpack there. But we are also sort of on the sort of waning edge of
Sorry.
this hour together. No, uh, I wanna talk for a moment about this DEI question. First of all, that term is an explosive term. Right now, I guarantee that half of this audience is got one thought, and another half of this audience
Yes.
has another thought about what we're talking about here, and they're kind of wondering, wait a minute, is this the moment I leave the conversation or not? Um, Very specifically, I think in the tour guiding community, everybody's been sharing a series of articles around the erasure of DEI themed itineraries that Arlington National Cemetery, which is run by the
Yes.
Department of
Yep.
Defense, has had on its website and its app, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to get a little edgier now that we're nearing the end and talk about how we all, as public educators and people who have our own ideas about this, um when are we participating in erasure? When should we be pushing back? When do we say there's a line and this is what I believe and I need to stop with this idea that both sidesism,
Yeah.
this, let's humanize everybody and turn it into a debate? And when do you feel like there's a line that's been crossed and that you need to stand up for something in a particular way? Because I know so many members of our community that are feeling that, and others don't feel that.
So are you talking about a situation where like, let's say we go to the grave of Medgar Evers, we tell the story. I don't know if he's been one of the ones who's erased, but like you go to the grave, you tell the story of Medgar Evers, and then your epilogue is this story, was up on the Arlington Cemetery website, and celebrated there, um until this week. And then just like and that's true. Um I mean, I when you say both sidesism, I mean that's always the critique of what I've been talking about. And there's a part of me that really believes strongly in that critique, that if we can just both sides until everyone is gone, right? Um and this is a really fraught political moment, and I really believe that the only way, if we're ever to emerge from this political moment with a chance of having a healthy discourse in our society, it has to be through civil discourse. It has to be through being able to humanize people and see them as real people who disagree, who have motives that at least to them are good motives, even if you know better and you know their motives are like, um because I don't see another way out, right? Um, so yeah, both sides have been can descend into something that becomes really ugly. I think the opposite of that also then descends into something really ugly. And so, but your question that you just asked about like not being complicit in erasure, I mean, if my job as a history teacher, social studies teacher, and people's jobs as tour guides, I feel like people expect that you're telling interesting stories. And we tell interesting stories, and we get people to think about dilemmas that real people have thought through. And I think the best defense of telling a story is that it's helpful for your thinking. and mentioning that there are people who aren't comfortable with this story. I mean, I again, I guess maybe that reveals your cards, maybe, but um, to say like this is a story we've been telling, us as tour guides, we've been telling for years. Um, I mean, maybe I'm fumbling around because there's not a good answer to that, but um, I feel like if you're in order to both sides something, if that's what you're going to do, you have to at least tell what the story is. So it's worth telling.
I live in New York. I'm a gay man. I went to university in Paris. I could not be more of a caricature of a bleeding heart. The like you could throw everything at me and it's probably true. What you're an educator, you're in the San Francisco Bay Area. What what is the role of bringing our own perspective into it, like honoring who we are, bringing our identity into our storytelling, acknowledging who we are and our perspective as we try to share what we share.
Yeah. My very first year as a middle school teacher, I got permission from my this was 2003. Got permission from my administrators to teach within the context of studying about social justice and civil rights about what was then predominantly called the gay rights movement, um, probably now called something different, and to teach about that some of that history. Um, we the controversy I gave those seventh graders was about at that moment it was the Florida gay adoption controversy about whether because Florida was trying to make sure that gay couples could not adopt kids, and we looked at different people's concerns, up to that point we treated it as here are different concerns people have, and let's look at the debate. And then toward the end of that week or so, um, I sat my students down and told them I was gay. I was 24 years old, maybe. And just let them, I said, look, uh, most of them did not know they knew other gay people at that time. Um, this is so long ago, it's hard to remember like a time when that was the case. But, um, and I invited them to ask questions about my experience, about, and I said it would just be from my experience, but, um, and it was amazing. We went for 2 class periods where they just had so many questions, and the way I answered them was not about my opinions or even about my values, just like about just answering about my experience. Um, and talking about like what people's struggles were like, here's what I know other gay people believe about things. That mean, and just giving the range, like so there were disagreements about whether gay people should be able to get married at that time, right? Among gay people. Um, and I think like I've always believed that it's so important to share of your own story and your own identity. And I know, Mitch, I've seen you do amazing narratives of your own story. Um, and having kids just like it's like the most meaningful experience of their educations up till that. Um, I think the most important thing about it, again, being mindful that it's you, it's your experience. Your experience helps people understand you and your context, but you also are doing it in a way that's um, proactively open to lots of ways of thinking and being curious about the way other people think and inviting people's questions in. That you're never trying to indoctrinate people into like, this is my worldview. I believe so strongly in it that I don't want you to leave here without believing it too. I think, but that's the subtext. And sometimes it's a subtext that like people don't realize they're bringing across. But when you listen to someone do it, it's very evident. Um, so leading with curiosity, and I'm just kind of repeating myself now, right? Leading with curiosity and using stories as a way to illustrate and not a way to hammer home things that they need to believe, or else they're not a good person.
Great. We'll leave the final minutes for some questions or comments or reactions that people have from the audience. If you want to just turn on your audio and talk, we'd love to hear what you've thought about this conversation.
Hey, Mitch.
Hey, Stacey.
Stacey here.
Yes.
Well, one of the main reasons why I'm not doing student tours anymore is that my passion for people trumps the history of what's going on. And so you guys will see me in DC a few times this year, but it won't be doing student tours. Um and my heart's pounding right now because, kids, transgender, I just can't even. But in terms of like all of my colleagues out there who will be working, with kids in this kind of administration, what would be a good way for those tour directors to come across as a safe space, yet not causing waves within their groups? Because I just know every group I was in, it was really hard for me, um, to erase. Or have there been other tour directors out there that have, you know, had other people put other people's beings down like that or create unsafe environments like the adults or the kids?
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh no, I is that a question for you? I want to make sure this is about tour directors.
No. This is all about you. But the question, I mean, at base, how do you make sure that you put yourself out there as being that safe space for people that might need it in your group?
We've been talking a lot in our groups of teachers about safety, like how it's important to have a safe space. And the one reason it's important to have a safe space is so that there can be uncomfortable conversations. And part of the discomfort is, as you're saying, Stacey, the environment right now, which is making many kids feel like their government doesn't view them as people, as fully human, as fully American. And so depending on if I think it's different if that topic comes up in the tour, whether or versus whether you just want to make sure that you show those kids and all of their classmates that you see them and you see them for who they are. But we model. I don't know. I don't have a great answer, but I think we model what our values are by how we treat everyone and how we see everyone, and showing those kids that they're seen is really important, and being curious about their identity in a way that if like, I mean, of course you don't want to ask, you want to be like intrusive in asking, but like if they show that they want you to take an interest in who they are, and finding ways to open those conversations so you see they see you as someone who gets them and who sees them. Um, but yeah, this is I hear what you're saying about, it's hard to know you're doing the work well in this environment. Um, I've found that, with my students, like we talk a lot together as a class about, what these latest developments are and what's happening, and I let them know and they react, and I give them opportunities to talk with each other, and just to like talk through it together, just so they know that they're not the only person who's scared, they're not the only person who's worried. And by giving them the space, I'm kind of communicating to those kids that like it's important for you to have these conversations. And it's by giving them the space rather than telling them this is what I believe about blah blah blah, that also helps the other kids and families who might believe differently. They don't feel that I am against them either, but I'm giving those kids the space, explicitly giving them the space to talk through what their fears and worries are. I don't know if that helps, but that's how I've been thinking about it for now.
I think that word conversation is actually really, really powerful. One of my professors back from my college days was a man named Richard Rorty, and he wrote his whole thing was that democracy is nothing more than an ongoing conversation, that our job is just to keep the conversation going. And that part of the problem today is that a lot of what's going isn't a conversation, right? It's it's throwing darts at each other, trying to hit each other, and it's because, you know, there's this fear of of the family, there's this fear of the tribe, which is kind of the social media sphere, which is like, let me just let me just write these giant pronouncements on my Facebook wall, and it'll get liked by all of my friends who are largely believers of what I believe in and not be seen by anybody else. But that middle sphere, that sphere is the sphere of the kind of, traditionally it's been the sphere of the community, right? The PTA meetings where moms have to come together even though they disagree with each other and fight for their students, fight for something else, and connect with each other, and then live next to each other. And that limits the amount of egregiousness that we all feel about how we behave. That at least has been the tradition.
And actually, no, Mitch, when you say that, it makes me think of something really important too. That I mean, having been on tours with you and seeing how not only how you work with story, but also like what the students are like on a multi-day, a week-long tour somewhere else. That yeah, I mean, we don't have a lot of those community organizations anymore, but tours can serve at least temporarily like that. Like when they are staying in hotel rooms together, they're sharing meals together, they're getting to know each other on a human level, even if they've known each other their whole lives. They're getting to know each other in a different way. And so it's not, I mean, the difference between tour guides and teachers is that we see them. I mean, I see my kids for 45 minutes each day and like a long stretch of time. And our purpose is to educate. That's our sole purpose. And with tours, my sense from being a teacher on them is that it instead of that, it's a short period of time where kids really go deep with each other, and that you can use those moments to create those kind of missing community bonds that we don't have, but that show up in tours. And that's a way to affirm people's sense of who they are. And it's also a way to expand people's thinking and expand their understanding of what other people think. And those things can happen powerfully and simultaneously.
Yes, that actually these tour experiences are such a unique and rare chance for the entire group to be displaced from their general ways and paths of behavior that they are at home, and they're open in a way that they normally aren't to receiving new thoughts about a place that they've never been before. And so it's actually one of these spaces of civic engagement that have long died out elsewhere, but are still alive for these brief, fleeting 5 days that you might have, or 7 days, or 3 hours. You can do this even on a walking tour, but there's something really powerful. And we are, in some ways, at the front lines of the remaining spaces that this exists in society. And it's to me, it's a responsibility. It's a responsibility to bring up the stories that need to be brought up, and to honor viewpoints and bring people together ultimately, right? Make sure that people, and and we have the ability to do that because here we are. I think of like Stonewall often, right? Stonewall is incredibly, important to me as a gay man. But when I stand up on my bench and I talk to students or I talk to adults, I don't say, this is the most important thing, and you've got to understand how important it is. I talk about the concept of home, and I talk about how people in this group, most likely some of you, don't feel at home right now, either because of your actual homes or the city you live in, because of who you are, because of the dreams you have. And the people who got off the Greyhound bus at the Port Authority and came down to Greenwich Village were people who didn't feel home where they were in Kansas, or in Oklahoma or Wisconsin or upstate New York, wherever it might be. And they found a place that was theirs, and they found a place that said to them, welcome home. And everybody can identify with that feeling, because even if we feel mostly at home in our lives, there are times that we don't. And then to tell the story of Marsha P. Johnson, a trans woman who was at the front lines and at the beginning of the story of what Stonewall means, it's not me coming at it as this combatant on the side of pro-trans versus anti whatever, right? I'm coming at it from creating that baseline emotional connection that we as a group all have with the idea of not feeling quite at home. And here we are, not at home, getting to feel that together in a very special space.
Adding on to that, just really quickly, I know we're at time, but I teach 8th graders and bring them on the DC New York trip with Mitch, and uh, kids that age often don't feel heard by the wider society. They often feel like they have so much they care about, and they often feel dismissed, even by people who have good intentions, right? And I think tours like this, and I thank you all for who do them for doing them, because they're an opportunity for these kids to really feel known and seen, both in the community you're creating and also in the places you're bringing them to and the stories you're telling. I mean, yeah, I remember Mitch's home story. I mean, that it made a lot of us adults cry, because that is like he's talking to the kids like real people who can understand big concepts, and they don't always feel that way. So thank you for all that you do to help them feel full and whole.
Thank you for these absolutely incredible, valuable tactics and strategies and just thought patterns and ideas. I think it's been really inspirational to the community here and to everybody who's going to be watching this recording afterwards. We're going to leave it. We're going to leave it at that because we are over time. And if you just wanted to all take a moment and put it in the chat to thank Mike, Mike, this has been really valuable and really wonderful. And
Thank you.
I kind of ripped you from school to come and do this for our community. And so I appreciate you having the courage to dive into a group of tour guides and share your wisdom. Really appreciate
Of
it.
course, this has been fun. It's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Great. All right. There'll be a recording online after this, and if you have anything you want to say to Mike, say it to me, and then I'll text him. Because he's busy being a teacher. Looking forward to seeing you on tour in a little bit, and thanks again, Mike, for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.